And joining me now to go further in depth on this is Arman Totayan, Ombudsman of Armenia. Arman, we really appreciate you taking the time to join the show today. Will you bring us up to speed? How did the latest clashes break out, specifically targeting Armenian territory?
Thank you very much for your invitation. I have first and foremost to say that Azerbaijani military forces are unlawfully present in the territory of Armenia, namely in Gegarkunik and Syunik provinces, since May this year. And since then, continuing with continuous spread of violence and gross violations of human rights, they continue their illegal, very often criminal activities against the civilian population of Armenia. So on November 14, Azerbaijani military started their unlawful acts and invasion of the territory of Armenia, and from November 16 they started already their military attacks by use of artillery and tanks, and we started receiving immediately alarms from civilian population. Our fact-finding mission that we urgently launched clearly proved that these military activities were, military attacks were in the immediate vicinity of Armenian villages. I mean specifically Syunik province, Sisyan community, and several villages, and even several kilometers away from the villages, even civilians could easily hear shellings, shootings, and explosions that were taking place next to their houses.
Wow, and I know that the goal here has been to try to keep some sort of peace deal, to keep these deadly clashes from breaking out. And Russia has played a role in that, brokering yet another ceasefire earlier after officials spoke on the phone with leaders from both sides. And in addition to deploying 2,000 peacekeepers to the region, how has Russia played a role in continuing to achieve peace in this conflict, even as it is still ongoing?
Well, within my capacity as the human rights defender, human rights ombudsman of Armenia, I can comment only on the issues related to human rights. So I can say that our monitoring missions, which we were carrying out since the end of the war, since of November 2020, and the location of Russian peacekeeping forces and border troops in Armenia and Artsakh, I have to say that our monitoring shows an important role, at least as a perception coming from the civilians and our monitoring to preserve the security of people and to protect the lives of people. But I have to say that despite this fact, Azerbaijani armed forces has been continuously grossly violating and even enlarging the forms of their activities and targeting civilians, such as setting massive fires near immediate vicinity of our villages, targeting civilian houses, shootings, etc.
Now, I'm glad you bring up the human rights aspect here, because I think that's something that often gets left out when we're just looking at the military clashes. What is life like for those who live in villages near the border and who have had to take on these ongoing clashes right near their homes? What has life been like for them?
Thank you very much for paying attention to this very important aspect, to the human rights, because as you rightly mentioned, very often it is left aside. And very often people, including politicians, forget about human rights. And we have to take into account that civilians live in all these areas, and they live in constant threat to their lives because Azerbaijani armed forces, given the policy of Azerbaijani authorities of hatred, organized hatred, state-sponsored hatred against Armenians, they continue almost every day violations. There are shootings towards civilians, there are threats with guns. We had cases of beating Armenian civilians even by Azerbaijani military. And I have to say that we have observed, and this is documented by objective evidence, that Azerbaijani armed forces commit crimes, regular crimes near the villages of Armenia against the civilians by stealing their cattle, by opening targeted shootings towards their houses, etc. And that is why the international jurisprudence that we studied of the European Court of Human Rights, of the International Court of Justice, prove that itself presence of Azerbaijani military forces near our villages and on the roads between our communities is already violation of the right of life, right to life of people, because itself their presence is already a real threat for civilians to their peace and security.
Now, I know even as you mentioned the ongoing presence of those forces there, does it look at all like there is going to be any kind of de-escalation anytime soon, especially on Azerbaijan's part, at least moving forward?
You know, the only source for all these violations is very clear. It is the state-sponsored hatred and policy of animosity towards Armenians of the Azerbaijani political authorities. This is the proven fact by objective evidence. And after the war, I have to say that this policy of Armenophobia has been even deepened and got extremistic forms of fascism. And the more and the comparison reveals a very clear picture. Azerbaijani president and other political authorities are spreading hatred almost all the day and almost every day. And all these violations by these soldiers are directly connected with this. And there is one very important indicating questions. Who is the chief commander of these soldiers who are now present in the immediate vicinity of our villages and on the roads? This is the president of Azerbaijan, which continues spreading hatred towards Armenians, which is based on two main pillars. This is the ethnic ground and the religious ground, which is again proven by objective evidence.
Yeah, and I know that there's certainly a lot at stake here, a lot of conflict to continue to dive into, and we will continue to follow this story, but we're going to have to leave it right there for now. Armand Tatoyan, thank you so much for joining us today and for your insight.
Thank you.